In this video, we're going to discuss two-way binding. So to get started, we're going to show you the effects of two-way binding, and then we're going to show you how the two-way binding is put together. So I've got a first name and a last name, and when I type in the first name, I'll just say hello and world. You can see that the greetings update as well. And when I click on this button, it will call a function on the binding context that will change the properties, and when the context changes, you can see that the HTML automatically updates. So let's go see how we put this together. Alright, here we have the HTML. You can see that we have an input. An input has a value property on it. So what we want to do here is we want to say, whenever the first name changes, I want you to set the value property on the input element. Right, so that would technically just be one-way binding. However, an input also has a change event. So whenever you have a change event, you can do two-way binding on it. That is a convention that you need to implement. So if you have a custom component and you want to use two-way binding on it, you need to make sure that that component has a change event, the same as what an input does, so that the data can flow back. So the data flows from the binding context to the HTML, and it listens to the change event on the input, and when that changes, it goes and writes the value of this input back to whatever first name was. So there's a flow between the value property and the first name, the value property on the element and the first name property on the binding context. If the first name on the binding context changes, it will set the value property on the input. If the value property on the input changes, it'll go and set the first name on the binding context. And that's why we call it two-way binding. So on the button click event, we had an update. Let's just go and have a look at that. So here we have a update method that gets called when we click the button. So it's technically an event. And here we use this .set property, and we say set the first name to John. So when you're dealing with two-way binding and you're setting the value on the binding context, it's important to note that you use the set property function on the binding context to go and set that property and also notify the binding engine that there are changes that need to be reflected in the UI. If you don't use set property, those changes won't be reflecting. In the same way, you can also use get property to get those values. So in this case, we're just going to add a quick console log so that we can see what those items are before we change them. So we'll say console.log this.get property, and in this case we only need the one parameter, which is the first name, because that's what we want to show, and then we'll do the same for the last name. Now, when I click the button, I should see what the value was before I make those changes. So here's my HTML. Let's refresh this quickly. We'll just add hello world again. Let's open up our dev tools. Click on the button, and you can see it's hello world, but those are John and Doe. So get property is used to get the value that's currently in the binding context. Set property changes it, and you can see the data flowing between the first name property and the value of the input, and vice versa. When dealing with two-way binding, there are cases where you want to be notified when that value changes so that you can execute some other form of logic. So the binding engine has a convention that you can use to tap into that change event. The convention is that we need a method on the binding context that has the same name as the property that we want to monitor, but appended with the word changed on it. And this will give us the new value and the old value, In this case, we are just doing a console log on the new value and the old value. Let's go have a look on the HTML side when we make changes to the view. Alright, so here's our screen, and we're going to type in hello and tab out, and now you can see that it says hello and undefined. Why? Because there wasn't a value before, and our new value is hello. But if I change this again to John and I tab out, you'll see that I get two parameters in. John, which is the new value, and hello, which is the old value. So to summarize, two-way binding is the flow of data from the binding context to the HTML and from the HTML back into the binding context.